Mo Monesteim has spent 15 years on those waters. Not years sailing through them on vacation. Not years visiting them as a tourist. 15 years working them, chartering boats, navigating channels, reading the tide, watching what the current does at different hours on different days in different conditions. He knows what goes into the Sea of Abaco and what comes back out. He knows where bodies go when people drown in that specific channel. He knows how long it takes the water to return what it takes. Fox News Digital rode alongside him as he recreated the exact route Brian Hooker says he and Lynette took on the evening of April 4th, 2026. Every channel, every piling, every turn from the Abaco Inn dock toward the Soulmate's mooring. And at the end of that recreation, Mo Monesteim said something that does not require a forensic degree to understand. He said, "It is very hard to disappear because we are so close to land. If you do fall overboard and drown, somebody will see you the next day. I will be driving the boat and I will see stingrays. I will see turtles, so I would see a human body. Somebody would see something. Somebody would say something." 25 days of professional searching. The Royal Bahamas Defense Force, the Royal Bahamas Police Force, the United States Coast Guard with aerial assets, professional dive teams, drone technology. Grid searches in water that local experts describe as clear enough to see sea turtles on the bottom, sometimes as shallow as 4 feet. Nobody saw anything. Nobody said anything. And as of April 29, 2026, sources familiar with the investigation confirmed to Crime Online that authorities in the Bahamas have made a pivotal decision. The search for Lynette Hooker has shifted from the water to solid ground. That shift is not a minor procedural update. It is the documented investigative conclusion of 25 days of exhaustive professional searching in a specific, geographically bounded body of water, and the decision that the answer is no longer in the water where Brian Hooker says it should be. This is what that shift means, what the geography of those waters has always been telling the investigation, and what the documented record of this case shows about the distance between the story that was told and the evidence that 25 days of searching produced. Before we go any further, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. This case is moving, and the shift to a land search is the most significant investigative development since Brian Hooker was detained and released without charges. Hit the like button if you have been following Lynette's story. And drop a comment telling me, do you believe the water search result changes how investigators view Brian Hooker's account? Leave your analysis below. I read everyone. Now, before the geography and before the search results, there is a woman who deserves to be remembered as a person, not as a case file. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. She was from Onstead, Michigan, a small town in the southeastern part of the state. She had given her last decade to the life she and Brian built at sea, selling everything, leaving shore behind, committing to the water as a way of living rather than a place to visit. She documented that life on Instagram under the name The Sailing Hookers. Sea turtles gliding past the hull, sunsets over open water, cinnamon rolls baked in a solar oven on the deck of a 55-foot sailboat named Soulmate. It was not a curated highlight reel. It was the actual record of how they were living, shared because she wanted to share it, because the life felt worth documenting. Her mother, Darlene Hamlet, told the Associated Press that Lynette had been around lakes, boats, sailing, and swimming her entire life. Her daughter, Carly Aylesworth, told CBS News that Lynette was very fit and strong, a good swimmer who could not simply have fallen off a boat by accident. Lynette's last Instagram post was April 4th, 2026, the same day she disappeared. The caption said, "Not going anywhere for a while." She had no idea. Now let us look at what the geography of those specific Bahamian waters has been telling investigators since the morning of April 5th, 2026. The channel between the western coastline of Elbow Cay and the eastern coastline of Lubbers Quarters, the specific body of water where Brian Hooker told investigators Lynette went overboard, is not offshore deep water. It is not the kind of channel where strong currents and significant depth create genuine recovery challenges for professional search teams. Mo Monesteim, who has been chartering boats through that channel for 15 years, described it to Fox News Digital with language that carries specific investigative weight, clear enough to see the bottom, sometimes as shallow as 4 feet. At high tide, He estimated the depth rises to approximately 10 feet. A channel that local boaters navigate constantly, rife with activity, a channel where in 15 years of professional experience in that specific geography, a person who entered the water and did not come out on their own would be visible. Jim Todd, the Hopetown volunteer fire and rescue volunteer who was one of the first people to encounter Brian Hooker on the morning of April 5th, and who spent significant time with him on the rescue vessel, estimated the alleged incident location at approximately 150 yards from shore, not offshore, not in open water. 150 yards from land and water where a local expert says he can see turtles on the bottom. Consider what 150 yards from shore means practically. It is less than 2 city blocks, in water that is sometimes 4 feet deep and rarely more than 10. In a channel where local boat operators navigate daily and where, in Mo Monastime's 15 years of professional experience, people who drown are recovered quickly. He said it specifically, drownings happen occasionally near Elbow Cay, and when they do, victims are recovered quickly. Lynette Hooker entered that water on the evening of April 4th, according to Brian's account, 150 yards from shore. She has not been found in 25 days of professional searching, in water where victims are recovered quickly, by professional dive teams who entered the water and searched systematically, by aerial surveillance that covered the surrounding geography, by Coast Guard assets with the training and equipment to conduct maritime recovery operations in exactly this kind of environment. Nothing, not one piece of physical evidence consistent with a person who entered that water at that location on the evening of April 4th. Mo Monastime looked at the result of 25 days of searching that geography and said, "Not being found, that's the mystery, not the drama, not the accusation, the mystery, the calm professional assessment of a man who has spent 15 years watching what happens when things enter those waters. Not being found is the mystery." Because in those waters, with that visibility, at that depth, at that distance from shore, things that enter the water get found. Lynette Hooker has not been found. Now let us look at what the shift from water to land actually represents in the framework of this investigation, because it is not the beginning of something new. It is the documented conclusion of something that has been building for 25 days. The Royal Bahamas Defense Force told NBC News that search operations for Lynette Hooker spanned the water, sky, and land from the beginning. The land component was always part of the methodology. What changed as of April 29th is not that land was added to the search. It is that the water has been effectively ruled out as the location where Lynette Hooker can be found. After analyzing tide, drift, and wind, authorities told NBC they were running out of locations to search in the water. They had applied every resource available. They had covered every area where drift patterns and current analysis suggested a person who went overboard at that location could have been carried. And the result was the same in every area searched. Nothing. When a professional search operation reaches that conclusion, when the water has been systematically searched and has produced no result, the investigative question shifts from how to find someone in the water to where they actually are. The movement of the search to solid ground is not investigators giving up. It is investigators following the evidence to where it is leading them. Investigative journalist Ashley Banfield, who has been covering this case in person, in those specific waters, talking directly to the people who know that geography, said publicly on April 19th, 10 days before the land search was confirmed, "I am told by those who are in the know, she is not in the water. It is believed she is instead up on land." That assessment, made 10 days before the documented investigative decision, is now consistent with what authorities have confirmed. What sources were telling Banfield then is what investigators are acting on now. Brian Hooker's account requires a specific sequence of events. Lynette went overboard at a specific location in that channel. Strong currents carried her away from the dinghy. Brian lost sight of her because of darkness and conditions. He paddled for hours before reaching Marsh Harbor. The water consumed her. If 25 days of professional searching with aerial, dive, and surface assets in that specific channel has produced no evidence consistent with that account, no body, no clothing, no material trace of a person who entered that water, then the investigative question shifts from whether the account is accurate to where Lynette Hooker actually is. That question now has a geographic direction: land. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. His attorney, Terrell Butler, stated that he categorically and unequivocally denies any wrongdoing and has been cooperating with relevant authorities. His Michigan-based attorney, Crystal Marie Hauer, told ABC News that Brian Hooker never would have harmed his wife of 25 years. He told CBS News that he believes Lynette may still be alive, that people have lasted in the Bahamas after falling overboard for days and even weeks, that the search area is vast and there are many possibilities for where she could have taken refuge. The Royal Bahamas Police Force Commissioner confirmed to NBC News that Brian Hooker remains a named suspect who has not been cleared and can be rearrested at any time. The U.S. Coast Guard confirmed that its criminal investigation into Lynette Hooker's husband remains ongoing. Those are the documented positions of the relevant law enforcement authorities as of April 29, 2026. Brian has not been charged. He has not been cleared. The criminal investigation continues, and the search has moved to land. The specific detail from Mo Monestime that belongs at the center of this analysis is not the most dramatic thing he said. It is the most precise thing. He said he would see a human body in that water, that he sees stingrays and sea turtles when he drives those channels, that a human body in that visibility at that depth would be visible. 25 days of professional searching. Nothing visible. The water has not found Lynette because Lynette is not in the water in the way that Brian Hooker's account requires. That is the documented result of 25 days of searching. Not a theory. Not speculation. The documented result. Carly Aylesworth flew to the Bahamas. She stood at the spot where Brian told investigators Lynette went overboard. She looked at the water. She said her mother could have swum a couple of feet to shore. She said her mother would have been able to stand up in that water. She told Wood TV that the trip answered some of her questions, but that the story sounds more sketchy to her now than it did before she went. Carly Aylesworth's mother, Lynette Hooker, has been missing for 25 days. The water has been searched. The answer is no longer expected to come from the water. And the question of where Lynette actually is, the question that Carly stood at that dock and asked into silence, is now the driving force of a land-based search that investigators have determined is where the evidence leads. Darlene Hamlet is 76 years old. She is in Florida. She told Ashley Banfield, "I just want nothing more than I love you and wish you would have come home." Lynette Hooker called the ocean her happy place. She documented a decade of that happiness in a social media account that went silent on April 4, 2026, with a caption that said, "Not going anywhere for a while." The water that was her happy place did not take her in the way Brian Hooker says it did. The search is on land now. The investigation continues. If you have any information about the disappearance of Lynette Hooker, contact the Royal Bahamas Police Force or the United States Coast Guard. Both investigations remain active. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. His attorneys state he categorically and unequivocally denies any wrongdoing. All individuals referenced are presumed innocent unless formally charged and convicted in a court of law. Subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell. Drop a comment below with your analysis of what the shift to a land search means. We cover this case with every verified development as it happens. Lynette Hooker deserves the truth of what happened on the evening of April 4, 2026. The water has been searched. It is on land now. And wherever she is, the investigation is moving toward her. Let us also examine something that has been consistent throughout this investigation, but that the land search confirmation now makes more analytically significant. The specific nature of Brian Hooker's account and the documented inconsistencies between what he told different people at different times. The timeline discrepancy is the one that the fisherman Joe's photo established definitively. The photograph timestamped at 6:34 p.m. shows both Brian and Lynette at the Abaco Inn pool. Surveillance footage from the inn shows them heading toward the dock at approximately 6:38 p.m. Brian's account to investigators described leaving significantly later, around 7:30 p.m. That is a gap of approximately 52 minutes between when the documented record shows them heading to the water and what Brian told investigators about when they left. In the context of a land search now confirmed after 25 days of unsuccessful water searching, that timeline gap carries different weight than it did in the first week of the investigation. If Lynette did not enter the water in the way Brian described, if the water search has effectively established that the account of a person going overboard at that location and being carried away does not match the physical evidence, then the question of what actually happened in those waters on the evening of April 4th begins with the question of what actually happened between 6:38 p.m. and whenever Brian eventually arrived at Marsh Harbor. Jim Todd, the Hopetown volunteer who spent significant time with Brian on the rescue vessel, addressed the timeline on the bow of that boat. He said that if they left at 6:38 or 6:45, they had plenty of usable daylight. The 15-minute dinghy crossing would have put them at the alleged incident location by approximately 6:50 to 6:55 p.m. At 6:50 p.m. on April 4th, there was still full daylight, approximately another 45 minutes before darkness. Todd confirmed that when he filmed during a conversation about the case at the same time of day, he had total daylight visible behind him. Brian's account of losing sight of Lynette in darkness and rough conditions is less consistent with a departure time of 6:38 p.m. than with a departure time of 7:30 p.m. The earlier time frame, established by the photograph and the surveillance footage, places the alleged incident in full daylight, in water that a 15-year local expert says is clear to the bottom, 150 yards from shore. The green cover-up is the second documented inconsistency. Joe's photograph shows Lynette wearing a light green bathing suit cover-up over her swimsuit. Brian told Jim Todd and the search and rescue teams consistently that Lynette was wearing a black two-piece bathing suit. The green cover-up was never mentioned to any member of the search team. Jim Todd confirmed this specifically. It was only a black two-piece bathing suit every time he was asked. The cover-up, which was photographically documented as being on Lynette's body at 6:34 p.m., never appeared in any description Brian gave to the people who were searching for his wife. Todd said when he learned about the green cover-up, it profoundly changed how he felt about Brian's story. And then there is the 9-hour drift. Brian told investigators he drifted approximately 4 miles from the incident location to Marsh Harbor across the Sea of Abaco. Local experts, including Ken the bartender who has spent his life watching boats cross that water, told Fox News Digital that 4 miles in 8 to 10 hours does not match what he knows about how the Sea of Abaco works, even in rough conditions, even drifting, even without an engine. It should not have taken that long to cover 4 miles. Captain Bill, the boat captain who was anchored directly beside the Soulmate that night and whose account has been confirmed through multiple outlets, said the weather in that specific area really was not that bad. His first-hand assessment of the conditions from a boat anchored in the same geography contradicts Brian's description of 3-foot seas and 18 to 22 knot winds that made it impossible to see Lynette in the water. None of these inconsistencies constitute proof of what happened. Brian Hooker has not been charged. He denies any wrongdoing. Every person associated with this case is presumed innocent unless formally charged and convicted. These are documented factual discrepancies between what Brian told investigators, what the photographic record shows, and what people with local expertise in those specific waters have assessed about the plausibility of the account. What 25 days of professional water searching has now established is that the result of those waters, the physical answer they have given after being systematically searched with professional resources, is consistent with the assessment of Mo Monestein, Jim Todd, Ken, Captain Bill, and Ashley Banfield's sources, that Lynette Hooker is not in the water in the way the account describes. The land search is now where the investigation is focused. That is the investigative conclusion of 25 days. Where on land, in what specific area, investigators are looking, that has not been confirmed publicly. The geography of Elbow Cay and the surrounding islands includes terrain that could be relevant depending on what the actual sequence of events was. What the documented investigative shift tells us is that authorities believe the answer is on solid ground rather than in the Sea of Abaco. Lynette Hooker's daughter Carly said the trip to the Bahamas made the story sound more sketchy to her than it did before she went. She stood at the spot, she looked at the water, and she came away with more questions than she arrived with. Lynette Hooker deserves answers. Her mother is in Florida waiting. Her daughter flew across an ocean to stand at the place where her mother was last seen and look at the water that has given no answers. And the investigation, 25 days after the evening of April 4th, has moved to land. That is where the truth is now expected to be found. Somewhere on solid ground in the Abaco Islands of the Bahamas. Somewhere that 25 days of searching the water confirmed is not in those specific crystal-clear shallow channels where Mo Monestein has watched things come and go for 15 years and where, in his own words, somebody would see something. Nobody saw anything. Nobody said anything. Now the search is looking in a different direction. And wherever Lynette Hooker is, the investigation is following the evidence that the water has spent 25 days producing by producing nothing. There is one more dimension of this case that deserves direct examination before this video closes: the specific behavior that multiple people observed in Brian Hooker in the hours and days after Lynette disappeared, and why that behavior is part of what the documented investigative record contains. Jim Todd spent significant time with Brian on the morning of April 5th. He was with him on the bow of the rescue vessel, trying to establish where Lynette went overboard. He helped transport Brian back to the Soulmate. He rode with Brian in a second crossing later that same day. And what Jim Todd observed and described on the record to Ashley Banfield adds a specific behavioral dimension to the documented picture. On the rescue vessel that morning, Brian could not clearly identify where Lynette had gone into the water. When Todd pointed to 3 different spots on the nearby shoreline, each one clearly visible from the bow of the boat, each one only 150 yards away, Brian's response was consistently that he just could not say. It was confusing. He could not be sure. For a man who was in a small dinghy at the location where his wife went into the water, the inability to identify which of 3 clearly visible shoreline locations was closest to the incident was something Todd said he noticed. Later in the day, when Todd transported Brian back to the Soulmate, he described Brian's demeanor as subdued and despondent. He said if his wife had gone missing, he would have been inconsolable, unable to function, requiring others to hold him together. He said that was not what he observed. He also said something that he noted specifically. When they arrived back at the Soulmate and Brian disembarked, he doubled over on the dock with what Todd described as a silent expression of agony, and that the police officers behind Brian likely could not see his face in that moment, but Todd could. Todd said the moment struck him as sincere when he witnessed it. He described it as a terrible moment. He is not drawing a conclusion from it. He is describing what he saw. Brian never asked Jim Todd about the search, who was out, how many boats, where they were looking, how he could get back out to help. On the day his wife had just disappeared, in the 12 hours after he was retrieved from shore, Brian did not ask those questions. Todd noted that if his wife were missing in a foreign country, he would have been desperate to know how many boats were out, where they were searching, how he could join the search. He acknowledged that people respond to crisis differently and that it would be unfair to simply project his own reactions onto someone else. But he noted the absence. The new audio obtained by TMZ, described by Crime Online's reporting on April 29th, shows Brian speaking to a fellow boater in a calm, monotone voice in the days after Lynette disappeared. The conversation focused on boat anchors and repairs, not on the search for his missing wife, not on the investigation, on logistical boat-related matters. Dr. Bethany Marshall, a psychoanalyst who reviewed the audio, described what she observed as an empathy gap, a pattern in the communication that focused on Brian's own logistical needs rather than on the urgency of the search for Lynette. None of this constitutes proof. People respond to trauma in vastly different ways. Shock manifests differently in different people. Brian Hooker has not been charged. He denies any wrongdoing. His attorneys have described him as completely heartbroken and deeply distressed by both his wife's disappearance and the trauma of his detention. What the documented behavioral record represents is what trained investigators and behavioral analysts look at alongside the physical evidence, not to replace it, to add texture to it, to understand what the person at the center of the case was doing and saying in the hours and days after the event that is being investigated. The water searched for 25 days and found nothing. The behavioral record contains documented observations from people who were present. The timeline has a photographically documented 52-minute gap. The clothing description has a documented discrepancy. The drift time has documented expert skepticism, and the search has now moved to land. These are the documented facts of the Lynette Hooker investigation as of April 29, 2026. They are not accusations. They are the public record. Lynette Hooker was fit and strong. She had been swimming since she was a child. She called the ocean her happy place. She documented a decade of that happiness and shared it with anyone who wanted to follow along. Her last post said not going anywhere for a while. She deserves the truth. Her daughter is searching for it. Her mother is waiting for it. And the investigation, 25 days into a search that the water has answered with silence, is now looking for it on land. We will be here for every development. Let us also situate this land search in the broader context of what the U.S. Coast Guard criminal investigation means, because the federal American dimension of this case adds a layer that the Bahamian search operation does not fully capture. The U.S. Coast Guard confirmed to Fox News Digital on April 14th, the same day Brian Hooker left the Bahamas, that its criminal investigation into Lynette Hooker's husband remains ongoing. That confirmation came specifically in response to questions about whether the investigation would continue after Brian's departure from the Bahamas. The answer was unambiguous. Yes, it continues. A U.S. Coast Guard criminal investigation is not a passive monitoring exercise. It involves active investigative work, collecting and analyzing evidence, interviewing witnesses, following forensic leads, building a case in a jurisdiction that involves American nationals in waters adjacent to the United States. The Coast Guard has the authority and the resources to conduct serious criminal investigations into maritime incidents involving Americans, and its criminal probe of Brian Hooker represents a parallel track to the Bahamian police investigation that does not depend on the Bahamian search operations continuing. The Royal Bahamas Police Force confirmed that Brian Hooker remains a named suspect who has not been cleared and can be rearrested. That status does not expire because he left the Bahamas. It exists in the investigative record, and it can be acted on if the investigation produces evidence sufficient to support charges. Brian Hooker returned to the United States on April 15th, citing his mother's illness. His attorney confirmed the departure. His whereabouts were not publicly disclosed beyond the report that he landed in Atlanta, Georgia. He told media outlets before leaving that he intended to continue searching for Lynette, that he believed she might still be alive, that the search area was vast, that there were many possibilities. The documented investigative decision as of April 29, 2026, that the water search has been exhausted and the investigation is now focused on land, is the answer to that hope. 25 days of professional searching with the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, the Royal Bahamas Police Force, and the United States Coast Guard found no evidence of Lynette Hooker in the waters where Brian says she went overboard. The shift to land is not the investigation supporting the theory that she survived overboard and made it to an island. It is the investigation following the evidence away from the location where the account says she should be and toward the location where the evidence suggests she actually is. Mo Monesteim said it plainly. Not being found, that's the mystery. In 15 years of watching those specific waters, in a channel where he sees sea turtles on the bottom on a regular Tuesday afternoon, in water that is sometimes 4 feet deep, at a distance of 150 yards from shore, not being found is the mystery. 25 days later, the mystery has produced an investigative answer. Not the water, land. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. She gave her last decade to the sea. She sailed under a name that called the two of them soulmates. And as of April 29, 2026, the waters that she loved have been searched by professionals with every available resource and have given back nothing. The search is on land now. The truth, wherever it is not in the Sea of Abaco. Lynette Hooker deserves to be found. Her mother deserves to hear that she is loved and that her absence has not been forgotten. Her daughter deserves the answer she flew across an ocean to stand at the water's edge and ask. The investigation is moving. The search is on land, and we will be here for every development that follows. The specific word that Mo Monesteim used, mystery, is worth sitting with for a moment because it is the precise word for what 25 days of water searching has produced in this specific geographic and investigative context. A mystery is not simply the absence of an answer. It is the presence of a result that does not fit the expected outcome. In those specific waters, at that specific depth and visibility, at that specific distance from shore, The expected outcome of a professional search conducted by 3 separate agencies with aerial dive and surface assets over 25 days is that if a person went into the water and remained in the water, they would be found. That is what professional search operations in clear, shallow, heavily trafficked Bahamian channels produce. That is what Mo Monostim's 15 years of local expertise has taught him to expect. Bodies in those waters, in those conditions, are recovered quickly. The mystery is not that Lynette was not found in 25 days. The mystery is that she was not found given the specific physical characteristics of the water and the specific professional resources applied to the search. In a different body of water, deeper, darker, more turbulent, with stronger currents and limited visibility, an extended unsuccessful search would be expected and explicable. In the channel between Elbow Cay and Lubbers Quarters, at depths a local expert describes as sometimes 4 feet with sea turtle visibility, after 25 days of professional operations, the mystery is not a statistical anomaly. It is a specific finding. It is the water communicating that what it was asked to have taken, it does not have. Ashley Banfield was on the ground in those waters, talking to people who know that geography. She said on April 19th that those who are in the know believe Lynette is not in the water, but on land. 10 days before the investigative decision was confirmed, the people with direct knowledge of that geography and direct communication with the investigation were already pointing toward the same conclusion that the formal investigative shift to land has now made public. The investigative framework that this shift establishes is specific and consequential. If Lynette Hooker is not in the water, then she did not enter the water at the location and in the circumstances that Brian Hooker described. And if she did not enter the water in the way his account requires, then the question of what actually happened on the evening of April 4th between 6:38 p.m., when the surveillance footage shows them heading toward the dock and the moment Brian washed ashore at Marsh Harbor, becomes a different question than the one that was being asked when the search was in the water. That question is now being pursued on solid ground. The investigation does not depend on where Lynette is for its parallel criminal track to continue. The U.S. Coast Guard's criminal investigation into Brian Hooker was opened because the circumstances of the disappearance warranted federal criminal scrutiny, not because Lynette's location was known. That investigation continues regardless of whether the Bahamian search locates her on land. The Royal Bahamas Police Force has confirmed that Brian remains a named suspect who has not been cleared. That status exists in the investigative record, and it is not affected by geography. What the land search represents in the most direct terms is investigators going to where the evidence leads rather than where the account says to look. After 25 days of looking where the account says to look and finding nothing, the evidence is now being followed in the direction that the geography, the local expertise, and the sources familiar with the investigation have been consistently pointing. Lynette Hooker deserves to be found. The water has been searched, the land is next. And the investigation, both the Bahamian search operation and the U.S. Coast Guard criminal probe, continues with the momentum of 25 days of professional work pointing toward a specific conclusion, not the water, land. We will be here when that conclusion produces an answer.